Welcome to the life and secret teachings of Jesus the Christ. It was in 1970 that Jesus appeared to me for the first time. This was to change my life drastically and send me on that long search to find the missing pieces that are not commonly written about. I wondered where he had been between 3 and 12 and where he'd been between 12 and 30. This was to cover some of the greatest libraries of the world. Finally, after 20 years, the pieces of the giant puzzle have been put together. Please join me on this very exciting journey. Welcome to another episode of Mystic Christianity. Last week we left off with our conversation pertaining to the Christmas mysteries. I said that there were two great mysteries, one pertaining to Easter and the other to Christmas. That Christmas was based upon the rebirth, not necessarily rebirth, but the birth of the Christ in all mankind. Now I wish to explain that the term Christ is a name given for the light of God that exists within our soul. The person that personified this was Jesus, who became known as the Christ. The word Christ means anointed, the Spirit's descent into the flesh, which is like a kind of like a crown or a special anointing. And that Christianity's name, the term Christianity, was born from that of following the path toward the Christing. In other words, to seek the path that would lead to anointing, as have great masters of antiquity. They have each one left their own personification of the path, a way and a means by which others could also achieve it. After Jesus advented on earth, of course, many followed him, and of course 1 billion people follow him today. So it's his teachings that are leading those 1 billion Christians onto the path of transformation or the birth of the Christ. This is not to separate us from our brothers and sisters. And I'm going to put aside today the balance of the sevenfold path of peace until after the holidays. We have 2 more episodes. And I would like to touch upon the Via Dolorosa next week, which is the most guarded secret of the Christian world, which pertains totally to the mastership of the Christian over his lesser nature. So for today, I want to spend more time upon what has created this mystery of Christmas. We have to go back to the very beginning of time, when God was without form. We cannot say that things were void, because void indicates to us a nothingness, a vacuum. We can say void if we refer to the fact that there was non-existing a creation. So that going back to the very beginning of time, if there ever really was a beginning, we are caught with the wonderful gift that God gave to us. God wove within himself a garment of light, so that that part of him which is unmanifest would sustain that part of him which was light. And it would be this light and light of consciousness which would not only bring forth creation, the visual universe as we know it today, but would also live in every form of life that existed. This was the greatest gift that could ever be given to anyone, because with this gift he gave us life, individuality. And he left within us the greatest gift of all, a part of himself which, although wrapped by many layers of tinsel and materiality, nevertheless is something which mankind is going to gradually unwrap. So every month, excuse me, every year, as we enter the Christmas holidays, we are caught again in this wondrous path that brings about this birth of this great light that is in us. It is almost like God wrapped us all up in tinsel. In the material world, ideas and desires for our growth. And each year, as we go through the reenactment of this phase when we give birth, that we unwrap, like a package, one more layer of the gift which God has given us. It isn't only that God has given us this light, but it is that He implanted it in us so that it gives us life. I think whenever we think that we don't want life and that it is no longer precious to us, we just have to think about oblivion and never having existed and never existing. And I think then we would get a little touch of this special gift that God has given us. Throughout the centuries, the light has had many names. The fact that Christianity calls it Christ because Jesus bore the light as we will bear the light. The only difference between us is Jesus had given birth to that light. He had become one with God. And we have that journey yet ahead of us. And He left us a path by which we could achieve it. And that's what we've been working on, is the 14-fold path of peace. However, I want to go back into ancient time, at least 6,000 years ago, because there must exist between religion and philosophy and science a perfect unity. We were created equal, we were created in unity, and that has not changed. It appears that it has when we looked at our individual differences, our individuality and expression. We think of ourselves as separate, but we are all bound by that one great power of God. And we are further bound and directed by His Son, the light, which existed since the beginning of time. It is that light in us that gives us our guilty conscience. It is that light in us that makes us suddenly desire to do something noble for someone else. And He is worthy to be worshipped. I'm going to start probably, as I said, 6,000 years ago, with the ancient sage of Zarathustra. God spoke to Zarathustra, saying, "Verily, I created Mithra, Lord of the light. O Zarathustra, I created him," and this is capital H, "I created him as worthy of sacrifice, as worthy of prayer, as myself." Of course, naturally, since an integral part of God was made into light, that is a part of God in us, that is a part of the light in everything. The man who lies to Mithra brings death to the whole country, injuring as much the faithful world as could do 100 evildoers. And what he means by this is that since the light, which we call the Christ light, lives in all of us, it sees everything that we have ever done. It knows everything that we will do. So therefore it is, in fact, he was referred to sometimes as the book of life, because he has recorded in him all of our good and our bad. So break not the contract, Zarathustra, not even one that you have entered into with the unfaithful, or one that you have entered into with the faithful. Because Mithra stands both for the faithful and unfaithful. The most hardened criminal that is in our prison today still has this light within him. This means that someday even this criminal will raise that light, and in raising it shall come unto the resurrection as soon as he has given rebirth to this great light. He said that the strong and the beneficent forces of the cosmos, of the faithful, should give virtuous offspring. And you're going to wonder, how would we give to the light? And it tells us later on that we give by our good thoughts, our good words, and our good deeds. You shall invoke him, God said to Zarathustra, for his brightness and glory, for his help, for his ease, how he comes to us with joy, how he comes to us with mercy and health, victory, good conscience, and bliss. He is overpowering, worthy of sacrifice and prayer, not to be deceived anywhere in the whole of the material world. Mithra, Lord of the light. Remember, the term Mithra existed 6,000 years ago. Jesus had not advented, so neither had the advent of Christianity or the search of the Christing. I will offer up sacrifice worthy of being heard to Mithra, the Lord of light, by the wisdom of the tongue, by good speech and good deeds, and with kind words. We sacrifice to the Lord of the light, who is truth, with 1,000 ears and 10,000 eyes, with full knowledge, strong and ever awake, unto whom none must lie, neither the master of the house, nor the lord of the borough, nor the lord of the town or the province. If the master of the house lies to him, then comes Mithra, angry and offended, and he breaks asunder the house. And the reason that they talk about it breaking asunder the house is falsehood lays asunder everything that we do. There's one thing about honesty, and particularly even self-honesty. We never need to remember what we said last. We are never caught in something that we do not wish to get caught in, because we have laid our life as an open book before all others. There will come a time in consciousness in humanity when we will have such discernment of spirit that we will see everyone as they really are, and we will not be able to hide from one another any of our deep and dark secrets. And of course, by that time, I'm sure we won't have many deep and dark secrets. But nevertheless, discernment is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and in time will most assuredly develop in all people, and we will no longer have crime and anger and hatred. We will know what others think. So, he goes on to say that those that lie to Mithra, no matter how swiftly they may be running, cannot overtake, they cannot get away by riding or driving. We invoke Mithra, the Lord of the light, the ever awake, who takes out distress from the people who have not lied to him. And it goes on. There's many things that it says here about the light as it was understood 6,000 years ago. And Zarathustra left in the Zendavesta for those that follow the path of Zoroastrianism. He left a path also, which was called the 16-fold path of peace, upon which the 14-fold path of peace of the Essenes is based upon. About the time, or shortly after the time of Persia, there came two great Egyptian masters. One of them was Hermes, and one was Moses. We don't often think of Moses as being a master, because most of us have no comprehension of what a master is even about. A master is one who has raised that divine spark, completed the resurrection of the dead, has come into oneness with God, and therefore teaches others. He may teach it in the world of science or music or art, because we have had many who have passed through and completed the resurrection of the dead as we go on through the 6,000 years of known spiritual history. So, but Moses was a master. He was not Jewish. He created a path because he saw the light on Mount Sinai. He spoke of the light strictly as a communion with God. But nevertheless, as he was on Mount Sinai, he reached that tremendous influence of the finite mind merging with the cosmic consciousness of God, which contained its 150 billion galaxies. I remember that day on June 6, 1971, when my mind suddenly became the mind of 150 billion galaxies. I have always brought the memory and retained the memory because I've never been disconnected from that source of light since that time. But the magnificence of God, the awesome power of this light of creation is almost beyond our imagination. Well, all of us know the history of Moses, how he went up to Mount Sinai and was told that he was to bring the Hebrew people out of Egypt, how he returned later with the Egyptian people as he completed that final part and phase of rebirth, which was, of course, the final phase of cosmic consciousness, as he became the leader of all these tribes of Israelites. People who followed his laws, as he established them in those days, became known as the Jewish people, followers of the law, capital L. So I'm not going into Moses, but there was a counterpart of Moses that existed in that time that most people are not too aware of. His name was Hermes. He was considered also one of the greatest masters of all time. Probably his greatest secrets are hidden here in the Divine Pomander. Because when the light appeared to Hermes, it came in the form of the Pomander. When the light appeared and came to me, it came in the form of the Christ. If we were in India, it would come in the form of Krishna. If we were studying Buddhism, it would come in the form of Buddha, because it comes in the form of the great masters who successfully bore it. So it's so special at this Christmas, and the reason that I'm going into this is because you have that same light in you, and one day you're going to raise it. And in raising it, you're going to be just like these greats, like Moses and Zarathustra and Hermes. So Hermes writes, "My thoughts, being once seriously busied about the things that are, and my understanding lifted up from all my bodily senses," means in the state of contemplation or meditation, the consciousness rises beyond this mundane world, where we break free from the gravity field that holds our mundane thoughts. And we've talked about this before, as we've talked about the power of thought. So he's saying that he was lifted up in consciousness as we would be in a meditative or contemplative state. And he said the senses were exceedingly held back as if they were of heavy sleep, meaning the physical senses that we see and hear and smell. These were as if they were in a deep sleep in which he could not utilize the physical senses. I thought I saw one of an exceeding great stature, and the infinite greatness called me by name and said, "What would you hear and see? Or what would you like to learn, to understand, and to know?" We all have these questions. What is God like? Why are we human? How did the universe come into being in the first place, and why? These are all questions that you and I have asked. And Hermes was no different. He said, I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am Pomander, the mind of the great Lord, the most mighty and highest emperor. I know what you would have, and I am always present with you. This light we have, this light of God, is indeed always with us." Then I said, I would learn the things that are and understand the nature of them and know God. "How?" he asked. I answered that I would be glad to hear his explanation of these things that I thought. Then he said, have me again in thy mind, and whatsoever you would learn, I will teach thee." And this is a very important lesson for us, because that which fused me in the mind with the consciousness of God, in God consciousness, was the fact that my mind was focused upon God, not only in meditation and contemplation, but I wanted to see God more than anything else in the world. And I left no stone unturned to fulfill this great dream of mine. So when the mind is focused upon anything, it must reveal itself to us. When Socrates pondered upon the sun and stood all day and all night, the sun revealed to him creation and the movement of heavenly bodies. When we focus upon someone we may not know, we come to know all about them. This is a part of the discernment of spirit. I always teach my students, however, to do this wisely, that we have a choice to know what Jean Dixon is doing tomorrow or to know what Pythagoras taught. So we have a choice where we focus our mind and our consciousness. We form that link with that consciousness. And so if we would know the secrets of the universe, then we would concentrate and fill our mind with the Christ consciousness, with the light of God. So he said, "Have me again in your mind, and I will teach thee." When he had said this, he changed his idea or form, and straightway in a twinkling of an eye, all things were opened unto me, and I saw an infinite sight, for all things were become light, both sweet and exceedingly pleasant, and I was wonderfully delighted in beholding it. But after a while, there was darkness, and it came down obliquely and fearful and hideous, and seemed to change into moist air. Well, what happened here, of course, as this great light descended to gather a suit of clothes, which we call the world of matter. As it gathered this earth around it, it became submerged and in darkness. And so then from the light, a certain sound joined itself to nature, and out flew the pure and unmixed fire. When it speaks of fire here, it's not speaking of volcanic fire, but the fire of creation, the fire of this divine spark we bear. which, as I mentioned, has so much to do with Christmas, because Christmas is the pageantry and celebration of the birth of the Christ in mankind. It said the air, which was also light, followed the Spirit and mounted up. The earth and water stayed by themselves, mingled together, that the earth could not be seen for the water. But they were moved because of the spiritual sound that was carried upon them. Meaning only in that God's divine plan, the law of Moses, the Ahura Mazda, or God of Zarathustra, is in everything, everywhere. He even sustains the light of consciousness. So it is this law of God that moves through all creation and will continue to do so unto eternity. Then said the Pomander to me, "Dost thou understand this vision and what it means?" "I shall know," said I, indicating that Hermes didn't quite understand it. And then Pomander said, "I am that light, the mind of God, who was before the earth that appeared out of darkness, and the bright and lightful sound of the mind." That is the Son of God, capital S. "How is that?" I asked. And he replied, "That which is in thee sees and hears the word of the Lord, and the mind of the Father, God, differ not from one another, and the union of these is life." So by the very fact that we have life, we are united, because we are the expression of the Spirit of God moving through the progressive states of matter. Again, there are many other things in this chapter to surprise and to delight us, but this was the initial vision itself, and I felt that that was probably sufficient. Well, from the days of Egypt and Moses and Hermes, civilization took on another turn. It went on, of course, into the Greek philosophy to be experienced by many of the great philosophers. But it also traveled to India. And we so often set ourselves apart in Christianity, away from Hindus, saying that Hindus worship heathens and Buddhists as worshippers of idols. And at the same time, we sometimes forget that we're praying always to our saints. But the unity of this light prevails through everything, regardless of what we call him. And of all religions in the world, Christianity is the largest. But Hindu runs up there very high, as does Muslim and Buddhism. So it behooves us to have a little bit of understanding about Hinduism. The Holy Bible of the Indian people is known as the Bhagavad Gita, or the Holy Gita. It is a fascinating story that deals with Arjuna, which represents you and I, kind of a human who has, through our diligent work, we have given birth to this divine spark. In Arjuna's case, he has given birth to the divine spark, Krishna, who is the charioteer. Now, Krishna has told Arjuna that he has to fight. And so Arjuna, a warrior, representing, like you and I, representing the human world, says, "Take me to the battlefield and let me see my opponents." So Krishna takes him to the battlefield, which we in Christianity know as the Battle of Armageddon. In fact, I always teach my students, this tells you, the Gita tells you why you should battle, but if you want to know what the battle's all about, you have to go to St. John's Revelation. So anyway, Krishna takes his disciple and he's placed Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield. Now, in this battlefield, which is the same as Armageddon and the plain of Megiddo, we have Krishna, Arjuna, sees all the good that he has done in all of his existence. And he sees all of the bad, just as we will. You will better understand this in the last 13 weeks of this course, because the last 13 weeks are going to pertain primarily to the resurrection itself, the way to resurrect, the understanding of the resurrection of the dead, because it is time to move out of being saved and enter into this resurrection. However, which, by the way, before I go on, is to move from being saved into the resurrection. The resurrection is the next step. So anyway, to go on with this, Arjuna, like all of us, takes a look at and sees, oh my goodness, the things I've done bad are greater than the things I've done good. So therefore the army was larger on the things that he had done bad than the things he had done good. So he sits down in the middle of the battlefield and he tells this divine light in him, Krishna, he said, I refuse to fight. So the entire Holy Gita is based upon the fact that Arjuna, mortal human, has refused to fight. Now, a part of this Gita does come a little bit further in the book, of where Arjuna, like you and I, we want to see God, exactly like Hermes wanted to see God. So, it is called in this chapter the cosmic form divine. And again, I won't be touching the whole chapter, but just enough to let you see that this birth is something which is ahead of us. And it has always been symbolized by the Christmas celebration ever since the forming of the Christian mysteries, which was just about the day after Jesus was crucified. So, he says, Supreme Lord, you have described yourself. Now he's talking to the light. You have described yourself, but I want to actually see your form divine. If you think it's possible for me to see, would you please then show me your imperishable? Imperishable means indestructible, because there's nothing that can destroy this light. If we cease to exist as an individual, the light would still exist, one with itself everywhere. So, Krishna, Lord of the Light, says, behold, O Zarathustra, not Zarathustra, I'm so sorry. Behold, Arjuna, the forms of me by hundreds and thousands of different sorts divine, of various colors and shapes. Behold the many wonders never seen before. Now behold in this body, the whole universe centers in the one, including the moving and the unmoving, and whatever else you desire to see. But you are not able to behold me with your own eyes. So I will give you divine eye, to behold me. And by this he's saying we just as a mortal bound to the corporeal world are incapable of seeing this light. But he, being within us, can reveal himself in form, enabling us to better comprehend. It is God's Son in us that will raise us in the last days to the resurrection. It is his Son in us that makes it possible for us to experience the unity state with God and to meet God the Father face to face. All this is done by this power and light that exists in us. So he is going to raise Arjuna's consciousness. And that kind of reminds me of when I experienced this in June 6, 1971, simply because the first day I had just put my husband on an airplane. I have not been married, by the way, for over a quarter of a century, but I had just put him on an airplane and had gone home, was going to join him later. I no sooner got home than this great presence filled my house, a presence more powerful than anything I had ever known. And I put some music on to raise the vibration of the surroundings, and it stayed for a half hour. The very next day, the same great and magnificent presence came again, stayed for a half hour, left, and on the third day, he put, just as I glanced out at the clouds, he put the bands, put kind of like something on each side of my head. And as soon as he did this, this enabled my consciousness to rise to that height where it could merge with the consciousness of God. It will happen to you also. I describe it as knowledge pouring in faster than the fastest computer ever conceived by mankind. And by nightfall, I was doing discourses on the origin of the universe. So Krishna, the Lord of the Light, as he is called in India, has now raised his student in consciousness so that his student can perceive him. So he said, having spoken, the great Lord showed to Arjuna his supreme form with numerous mouths and eyes, with numerous wondrous sights, with divine ornaments and numerous weapons, wearing divine garlands and apparels, and resplendent, endless, and he faced all sides. Of course, he faced all sides because in his true form, he is formless light. There in the body of God, of the gods. And in this case, God is capitalized and gods is made small. You must understand that gods is looked upon as a reflection of the great God, one who has achieved this divine estate, or planets, galaxies. So there in the body of the God of gods, Arjuna saw the whole universe resting in one, with all of its infinite parts. And filled with wonder, his hair standing on end, he bowed his head to the God and spoke with joined hands. I see all the gods, O God, in your body, and hosts of various beings, O Lord of creation, and all of the celestial family. I think that's probably, I see thee a boundless form on every side, with arms and stomachs and mouths and eyes, neither any end nor any middle, and not even a beginning. I see Lord of the universe, the cosmic form. So we get an idea as the light, which we celebrate every Christmas, journeyed down through the avenues of 6,000 years ago of Zoroastrianism, moved into Hermes, Hermetics, and Moses, and in through the Holy Gita. We are caught with this particular magic of the fact that Christmas means Christing. We mentioned in the mysteries last week of how the descent of the Spirit comes to live in the flesh, and that through this man is raised to make this wondrous journey of the Via Dolorosa. I'm going now to the board, if we can, for a moment, or for a time. And I just dropped my chop, but of course that's not unusual either, so excuse me a moment. We talked about the first part of the mysteries. We had this gigantic gateway, which is, of course, the eye of the needle, where many are called and few are chosen. It's not that everyone will not have their opportunity to enter into the transformational change or rebirth, but it is simply the fact that this is a gradual transformation that's going to take place over many, many centuries. And the reason that people teach is to hasten this day when all mankind will achieve it, because we will not have peace until we do. And contrary, we will not have the end of the world until every man, woman, and child has reached it, because we cannot graduate and leave human form behind until this task has been completed, because human life is a cycle of necessity. I have studied the scriptures for decades. I never go to bed at night without reading the Bible. And I've been over and over and over New Testament. And as you know, I wrote a book on Jesus' life. And I am caught with the wonder of the fact that it's always there. Jesus spoke of this great light as the Son of God, a small, capital S, and he spoke of it in third person, not that it was himself. We're not always aware of that because we're caught up with the statements of these, when you see me, you've seen God, and things like this. And I explain that if God is in everything, and everything for 6,000 years has indicated that, then if I see you, am I not seeing an expression of God? God may not have the freedom to manifest through you, and you may be doing things that would be contrary to the way of God, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't dwell in you, and that you are not an expression of him, because you are. St. John's revelation, because St. John the Beloved also reached this great stage, and he reached it as a disciple of Jesus, because Jesus taught this light, and John, having reached this state, finished probably his cosmic consciousness on Patmos. He wrote about his vision, similar to what Hermes wrote about in the Divine Pomanders. He said, I was in spirit on the Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. And spirit means in higher consciousness, in divine consciousness. The Lord's day is not necessarily the Sabbath day, as we would think of it. Saturday was the Sabbath in the Jewish holidays, holy days, and Sunday, of course, is the Christian Sabbath. But he's speaking about the seventh epoch, the final phase of human progression, when man graduates from human to divine to forever transcend the earthly ties. So he said, I am in the Lord's day, meaning I am in divine consciousness, walking on earth for the last time and achieving my immortality. And he said, I heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, saying, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And this light was the first, as it came down into the moist earth, as it put upon itself a corporeal body, yours and mine. It was the first that existed before you and I existed. And he said, and Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. This means then that as we give birth to him and complete the resurrection of the dead, he will rule over every soul and every heart. And someday he will rule over all the earth when every man, woman, and child has raised him. He said, what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches. And I'm not going to get into to Revelation right at this point. That's an entire course of its own. But I did write the book of Odyssey of the Apocalypse, in, of course, in a most unusual and remarkable way. It was published, I think, 2 years ago, last December, in hardback. I turned to see the voice that spoke to me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And the 7, as I mentioned, represents the final epoch of earthly life, meaning that human is 6, 7th is divine. As we one by one graduate to remove ourselves from the earthly kingdom and walk no more in the world of matter. In the midst of the 7 candlesticks stood one like unto the Son of Man. And the Son is capitalized. Son of Man means born divine rather than born of woman's womb. Son, S-O-N, small letter, means born of woman's womb. So, Son of Man, and he was clothed with a garment down to his foot, and the gird about the paps with a golden girdle. And of course, this means his mystery is unrevealed. We have not yet taken the final Christmas wrapping off of this tremendous gift which God gave to us, the gift of ourselves. We have not yet unwrapped the many wrappings that keep us from our true nature. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were a flame of fire. I like to think of that because in giving birth to this divine nature who has seen everything, who knows everything, who sweeps through us to purify the impurities out of our body, our minds, our souls, he burns through like a great fire in his purification. And his feet were like fine brass. And brass in the ancient days meant the physical nature. So we know that he stands pure in the world of matter. His feet like unto fine brass, as if they'd been burned in a furnace. And his voice is like the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, which pertain to, and I'll hold this up for a moment again. I think we see it a little bit on the outskirts every week, and we're always going to get to these 14 angels, and I promise you we will. But anyway, those 7 stars are the 7 cosmic laws. And when he speaks of the 7 churches, he does not speak of the churches of Asia Minor, the 7 churches of Asia Minor, but he really speaks of the 7 forces of nature. So, the 7 stars are the cosmic law: power, love, wisdom, eternal life, creative work, peace, and oneness with God. And in his mouth he had a sharp 2-edged sword, and that sword is truth and justice. If we will abide forever by truth and justice, we will make not only no mistakes, but we will overcome every obstacle of human life. And so he said, let's see, and his countenance was as the sun which shineth in his strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand on me, saying to me, "Fear not, I am the first and the last." That I explained to you, that the firstborn, the light which came into the world of matter. And now John has raised that light, as you and I raised that light. I am he that lives and was dead. You see, the light has dwelled in us. Our attention has been focused on the corporeal world. And so he has walked in us through the centuries as dead, because he has not been able to not allowed the freedom to manifest as he wants because he's been bound by our corporeal actions. Now, having set him free, gone through what is classified as rebirth, giving birth to that which is divine rather than being born of that which is human, now he is no longer dead. And behold, I am alive evermore. And amen. He also says, though, that he had the keys of heaven and hell. Remember, we had this drawing on the board that I indicated that when the Christ is born in us, that, and we had him, I think, if I think about it, last week as we were showing this, kind of we talked about the lower and more subtle bodies, like the emotions and the feelings, and this lower mind, which makes us think all of our bad thoughts, and then it was connected into our lower self. We then had used him as a star. Now on today we kind of have him raised, and I believe that's probably about where we had left off in that sense, because as he is raised, he unites us with God in heaven. In other words, he is an aspect of God. So when he has been born, he rejoins the heavenly abode and brings to us all of the angelic kingdom, as well as the consciousness of God. So by our meditation upon God and communion with God, and that's not prayer. Prayer has an integral and marvelous place because we're always asking for something. In meditation and contemplation, we are giving of ourselves. And in our communion with God, we give birth to his Son in us, whether we call his son Mithra, or whether we call him Pamandras, or Krishna. For you and me, we give birth to his Son, the Christ in us. So, and brings with him the angels. And I assure you that when this happens, all of a sudden, you have communication with anyone in the angelic kingdom. Oh no, not father and mother. They belong in, they are, and most of them live in the unseen kingdom, or the lower level of the angelic regions. When I speak of the angelic beings, I'm talking about people like Jesus and John the Beloved and John the Baptist and the Holy Mother and the great philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about that we are able then to communicate with the world of angels, because when he descends, he brings this and makes all this possible. This is what Christmas is all about, the birth of the Christing. And it's given the honorable and holy day of the winter solstice, a time, as we mentioned last week, a time of rebirth, when the ancients used to look up to the sky and see the star and know that the days were going to get longer and that they had been granted life, that there would be a process of being reborn, that the flowers would grow. So we celebrate the birth of the Christ on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Our Christmas dinner represents this tremendous feast of the Christing, as when he descends and brings with him the total knowledge, as we have read throughout history. He brings with him that total knowledge and understanding and brings you face to face with God of 150 billion known galaxies. Ah, what experience lies ahead in the hearts of man. So having brought the angelic kingdom with him, he now is in a position to teach, to purify, to bring to us the knowledge of heaven. And so now he is no longer in us, but we are in him. And he can raise and lower himself He does this so that as he lowers himself, he causes us to purify our physical world, our emotions and our feelings, so that we have the potentiality, ultimately, of not a hell on earth, but we bring down the new Jerusalem, and heaven shall reign over all the earth, and human progression will end. Merry Christmas to all.